Greetings, YouTubers. Today's video is going to be about radio jammers and the techniques that they use to make them hard to find, whether those techniques are technical in nature or psychological. So first we're going to start off with something that's being blamed for all of the problems of ham radio, the Baofeng. The Baofeng is a Chinese radio company that has been producing a radio that maybe 20 years ago would have been $450, now for $23. It's a radio that covers the VHF and UHF bands, frequency agile, has a built-in siren, can do strange splits, more on that later, has Vox. This thing is just a multitude of wondrous little toys for $23. The problem is they fall into the wrong hands or angry people and they get abused. Now, let's move on to what happens with these things. So let's talk about repeaters. If you're on amateur radio, you probably know what a repeater is. There's an antenna mounted somewhere with some equipment. And this allows two people on weak stations to cover a large area. The way a repeater works is it listens on one frequency and it transmits on another. So when you have a walkie-talkie, you hit your button, and if it radio's programmed correctly, the radio is going to transmit on one frequency, the repeater's going to hear it, and it's going to retransmit that signal on a slightly different frequency that everybody else has their radio programmed to listen to. So repeaters have been a favorite of jammers for a very long time, multitude of reasons, whatever they may be. But what happens with repeaters is they're usually mounted high up where they can hear very well. Repeaters, by law, are supposed to have a timeout timer at 3 minutes. If something goes wrong with the equipment, after 3 minutes of being locked in transmit mode, the repeater is supposed to time out by law, but not all of them do that. Now, the way jammers mess with these things, you can hang a dead one, throw a dead key, which means you just push your button and do nothing, and it just creates silence on the repeater. The other trick that a jammer can do is you go slightly off frequency. For example, on this one, the input is 146.76. So you go 146.755, for example. You just go 5 kilohertz off, and it's enough to wreak havoc and make noises on the repeater. Now, most repeaters require a tone to activate. There's either a subaudible tone, subaudible meaning it's below what the handheld radio can reproduce, but still audible if you connect a hi-fi speaker to a ham radio set. They don't do a good job of filtering it out, so you can hear the PL tone. Or you could use a digital tone, which is encoded on the transmission. So the repeater is listening for that tone before it opens up and passes audio. Now, if somebody is transmitting on the input frequency of the repeater without a PL tone, what ends up happening, it basically covers the ears of the repeater. It's like turning the squelch knob up. So users of that repeater can't get in unless their signal is stronger than the jammers. FM works on the capture effect. It's not like AM, where the signals mix and you could hear both audio. On FM, the strongest signal captures the frequency. Now there is a small margin where there will be cat fighting. Both signals will back and forth and so forth. But eventually one will supersede the other and wipe out the other. By jamming the input without a PL tone, it makes it seem to a lot of users that the repeater doesn't work. So this is a favorite trick of jammers everywhere. Playing music on a repeater, another old school trick. Unfortunately, the Baofeng radios have a little red button on the side that activates a siren. Now, for those that didn't know, on the Baofeng siren feature, if you program the PL tone that the repeater wants to hear on the output, but on the receive side of your Baofeng, the Baofeng is capable of 2 different tones. On the receive side, you program the wrong tone. The Baofeng will continue to cycle the siren. because the siren is actually a safety feature that the Chinese incorporated into the radio. So it'll transmit, and then it'll stop, it'll listen, and it'll wait for a transmission. And if it hears something, then it quits activating the siren. However, if you program a PL tone that is unrelated to the repeater on the receive side only of the Baofeng, and you put the correct PL tone on the transmit, the Baofeng will sit there and do siren noise until it eats the battery, which is kind of an interesting undocumented feature of this radio. Not a lot of people know about it, so I'm telling you about it here. Now let's move on. So you got a problem with the jammer on your repeater. One of the oldest methods of finding things is look at the signal strength meter. Now this frequency is on HF, but you look at the signal strength meter and you basically drive around and try to get the highest reading, and when you see something that's way up there, like the 40, 60 dB mark, chances are you're in front of the mystery signal. Now, obviously, if you're on the output of the repeater, you're going to drive yourself right up to the repeater site and be very proud of yourself for standing in front of a tower. But you have to look on the input of the repeater. Problem with this is that you're going to be driving around a lot. And if you have a lot of stations scattered around, you can get an idea where somebody is, but it becomes a bit tougher. Now, with a directional antenna, if you could swing it around fast enough, maybe you can get some bearings on where they are. Of course, this is foiled if the jamming station is mobile, or the jamming station is also on a beam, on a directional, and they're bouncing their signal off of large flat surfaces, like perhaps buildings with mirrored glass, billboards, things of that nature that are going to increase the reflected signals. You might be chasing a reflection. So that's one of the other tricks that jammers can use. Now let's move on. Okay, so I went to MFJ and I spent $700 and I bought one of these gadgets right here. These things are cool as hell. This is a radio direction finder, a Doppler. The way this works is those four antennas, you're supposed to select them according to frequency, and you're supposed to separate them according to frequency. And what happens is, inside that box, it electronically switches those antennas in a constant rotation. It's picking each antenna at a specified speed. It's much faster than you could ever do mechanically. It's doing it electronically. And what it's looking for, it's measuring time differences of the radio signal arrival at each antenna. So picture, if you will, if your signal was coming from this side, it would hit this antenna, then that one, then that one, then that one, right? It would go like that. And that's how the Doppler is going to figure out, based on, and we're talking microseconds here, maybe even nanoseconds. Radio signals travel very fast. But as the signal comes through this array, and due to the electric steering and the switching of the antennas, the unit is able to figure out where the signal is coming from. Problem is, this is designed for a signal that comes this way. But if the signal is coming from the top, notice what has happened. If the signal is coming from up top, now your distance to antenna is gone. There isn't enough information for the Doppler to do anything. So if you have a signal coming from anywhere above, the efficacy of this device is greatly handicapped. And this device also suffers from reflections and multipath. Once again, somebody who's bouncing a signal off of a surface, like a billboard, a large building, a moving truck with a small beam, what have you, it's going to generate a false positive that you're going to see. Multipath is caused by radio reflections through buildings in heavily dense areas. For example, downtown Dadeland, where you have a lot of buildings all crunched up. This thing is kind of useless unless you roll right up to where the car is on the ground. If they happen to be up in one of those buildings, good luck. Ain't gonna get nothing. Nothing useful, that is. It's not. It might get you in the neighborhood, but it's not going to get you to where it is. These things have limitations, and just like any other instrument, you have to know how to use them. So in the right hands, they can be useful. Now let me show you what this will output. Here's an example of a plot. The newer units use mapping software from Google, and what will happen is you can get multiple hits, and once you figure out where these all cross, you get a point. Okay, my signal is here. Well, here looks small on the map, but here is a big place. You still have to get down to a residence, a business, a parked car, something. So somebody who is jamming, if they have any kind of knowledge, they're not going to be sitting in their house, because that is stupid. That's why radio pirates, for example, Pirate FM, they would get busted left and right. However, somebody who is really determined to jam a repeater, even if you do have a Doppler system, when they're mobile, it's practically impossible to catch them. You might figure out where their path is and maybe be able to get a path of travel. But, okay, try following a single car down the turnpike. Try following a single car down the turnpike with a handheld radio in it. So, even though this is a very fancy and cool toy, without proper knowledge of how to use it, proper experience, you spend $700 and good luck. All of these things require practice and training. So if you buy one of these, you might want to just leave it on the car and drive around and learn to capture known signals and learn how your instruments work and learn how they work around buildings and such. Because if not, you're just going to be burning gas. And at $4.29 a gallon, which is what it's at now, that's a pretty painful endeavor. So let's say you do have one of these devices here. You did manage to find a jammer. Now what? Well, usually, just the fact that they got caught, the social implications are enough to embarrass most people to stop. But let's say it goes further. They were jamming public safety, something big, and you caught them. And you decided that I'm going to send my complaint over here to the FCC. Well, here's the issue. Just like when you get a speeding ticket. When you get a speeding ticket, the radar gun or LiDAR must have valid calibration that is up to date, and the operator must be certified in the use of that device if it's going to stand up in court. This applies to cops as well. If you do not have a valid operator's certification for the device, and the device is not calibrated, and the calibration is up to date, you own a cool toy. Is the FCC going to pay attention to you? Perhaps. But should you wish to file a complaint, and let's see if we can get that back here. There we go. Okay. There's all the information on where to file a complaint. Now, the FCC is currently severely understaffed. At one point in time, they had a field office in Miami. That was closed, and then they moved to a field office in Tampa. The Tampa field office has closed. Then they moved to a field office out of Atlanta to cover the Southeast United States, and that is severely understaffed. They are now taking reports via an online service of people who have no radio training whatsoever. It's basically a call center, and they're heavily understaffed. So my personal suggestion, and I've been a ham since 1994, and I've known a lot about this, and I've played with all of these instruments, done a little RF engineering. That's why I have a little bit of experience with this. My personal suggestion is maybe teach yourself a little bit about how to ask questions to people, perhaps how to talk to them. And right here on Wiki, you can get books that are field manuals, for example, I've personally used that CIA interrogation manual. I have a copy of it. It's a very good book. I would strongly suggest it. But there's a number of other books here that teach you how to talk to people. Because simply getting somebody and screaming at them is probably going to result in them laughing at you and telling you to go pack sand. So sometimes just sitting down and talking to somebody, hey, why is this happening, might be sufficient to resolve the problem. These jamming things, they happen for a number of reasons. Some good, some bad. Some people are bozos, some people are idiots. Other folks are upset about something. There's two sides to every story. And before you go jumping on a bandwagon, hey, let's beat this guy up, remember that at the end of the day, you're chasing a jammer. We live in a world of litigation. There is no more hitting anybody. There are cameras everywhere. And there's hungry lawyers everywhere. There are still laws regarding entering people's property and so forth. So you can't go around playing cop. You can't go around threatening people with arrest. That can get you in trouble. The proper solution is to figure out why this is happening and try to resolve it. Because even if you have the proper instruments, you're back over here. Hey, I bought one of these. I got this wonderful thing. I'm gonna catch this guy and I'm gonna videotape him. Good for you. YouTube is full of videos of hams that have been caught jamming. And these guys over here, they don't have a lot of money to be cracking down. Yes, the fines are huge. But remember that in order to get that fine, your video is not going to be the one that's going to prosecute anybody, because your video was done with an uncalibrated piece of equipment and you are not a trained and certified operator. The FCC has to go out with their instruments in their truck, which are calibrated, and their operators are trained, and they are going to produce readings that have to do with the amount of radio energy that is in the air. Your ham readings are nothing more than a way to prove amongst your friends that, hey, maybe it's coming from here. So oftentimes the best solution is to find out why it's happening and try to resolve it. Not every solution will be resolved, because there's just some people out there that get a couple of drinks in them and start trouble, and sadly that's the way it is. But sometimes issues can be resolved simply by trying to figure out what the conflict is between different individuals. And with that, that's the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I just want to do a little plug for our sponsor. DFR, they're our sponsors. They're solutions for today's alcoholics. If you have a friend that's suffering from alcoholism, chronic unemployment, or laziness, please contact DFR Industries. They're here in Cutler Bay, and they can help you solve these problems. DFR Solutions for today's alcoholics.